Hello everyone, welcome to Oculus Occulta. My name is KiKi, and today I just wanted to go over the different elements one should consider when learning tarot card meanings. I found that over the nearly 20 years now that I've been practicing tarot, there's a little more that goes into the fundamentals of each card than one might expect, and I just wanted to touch on those things as I've come to know them in my life and practice. For learning purposes, we'll be using the Rider-Waite deck initially, but of course, I will go over many other types of decks in other videos, but for now, we'll start with the standard Rider-Waite deck to grasp fundamentals. Generally speaking, when we're trying to figure a tarot card out, there are 5 major things to consider, and I will list them for you very briefly before going into much more detail in a minute. You'll see them on the screen here. The first thing to look at is, number 1, the actual picture on the card. Number 2, the second thing to consider is the meaning that you'll find in books or websites or through courses with a tarot teacher. Third is how the card speaks to you intuitively. What intuitive meanings do you think of to yourself when you look at the card? Number 4, the possible negative or shadow aspects of the card. And number 5, how the meaning of the card can change when it's next to other cards or in a particular position in a tarot spread. So what do these things mean? Let's go over each of them one by one. The first thing I said was to consider the actual picture on the card, which is just the image itself. When we're looking at a card at the most basic level, we ask, what is the visual image on the card I'm looking at? At this point, we usually just describe the picture itself, such as the colors on the card, the people or scenery, any little symbols we find. Are there animals on the card? Are we inside of a building or outside of one? Just anything we notice in the art of the card itself, almost just as an art piece. So for this example, you would say, the sun is out, it's yellow, there's an abundance of yellow, there's this young person. Here, he's holding a white rose, for example. There's a white dog. At the bottom here, he's on a cliff. There's mountains in the background. What he's wearing, etc. The way I like to do this is to pretend I'm describing this card to someone over the phone, and they have never seen this card before and they can't see it now, so I have to describe it for them. So that would be the first level or element, if you will. Now this part I personally never wrote down in a journal. I always just said it out loud to myself. But if you like to write, then I think you should feel free to add this sort of description to your notes or to your journal. Now some of you might think, okay, why is this even important to do? I can see what's on the card. What's really the purpose of describing what I'm seeing if I can see it? And I used to think this myself, which is why I never really bothered to write it down in any tarot journals. But I'll give you one example as to why this is actually a useful thing to consider. Take the 7 of Wands out and take a look at it for a minute. If you were describing what you saw, you'd say there's a person with dark hair who is holding a stick or a baton, and they're on a green hill, and they're fighting off a few other people who are out of view below them. And these people look like they're trying to fight with him and knock him off this hill. It looks like he's having a hard time doing this, trying to defend himself, and the sky is blue, so it's daytime. But have you ever noticed the shoes? Look down at his shoes. They're mismatched. Why is that? It took me over a decade to notice it, and I didn't even notice it on my own. It wasn't until somebody else pointed it out in a Facebook tarot group that I was in that I realized, wow, they're right. I've never seen that. Years and years, I had looked at these cards and thought, okay, yeah, it's a guy on a hill fighting people off, got it, the sky's blue, what else is there to describe? And then, when the shoes were brought to my attention, it felt like I had never seen a tarot card before in my life, and I had to go back and re-examine every card to see what else I've missed. So I would suggest to try and not take this step for granted too much, even though it might seem pretty basic. The second thing to look at is the meaning ascribed to the card, and this has been established by the card's history and what you'll find in books, okay? This is what we find when we read tarot books, or when we ask a teacher about the card, or if we look up the meaning online, or when we open up a tarot deck and look at the little booklet. They'll give us a little set of meanings. So we're answering the question, what does this card mean, as opposed to what am I looking at on this card, which was what was answered in the first element. Sometimes the meaning of the card is not immediately obvious from just looking at it, but sometimes it is. So for example, if I told you the Three of Swords is a card representing heartache, you'd probably have an easy time believing that because it seems almost literal. But if I told you the Three of Swords could also mean someone in a relationship is cheating, this is a little more symbolic because it's not necessarily immediately decipherable. The first thing you would say if you saw this card was heartache or heartbreak. A cheating partner is still a believable interpretation, but I would need to explain why it has that meaning in a little bit more detail, such as there are three swords, meaning a third person might be involved. The stabbing of the heart indicates betrayal or emotional pain from finding out about an affair. It represents cheating as related to a romantic relationship rather than, say, tax evasion type of cheating or cheating on a test because there's a heart there, which represents matters of love, etc. So you can see that the second meaning is slightly more nuanced than just saying heartache. Okay, then the third thing we have to consider when learning how to read a tarot card is our own intuition as it corresponds to the card's imagery as well as to the context of the question being asked. So what does this mean? Sometimes when you do a tarot reading, you might find that a word or a meaning will suddenly come to you, seemingly out of nowhere, that you've either never heard before or never considered before for that card, except for in that moment while you're reading. You've read the books and you memorize the standard meaning of a card, but suddenly, one day, you look at the card and it makes you think of a word or meaning that seems completely out of left field. But for some reason, it feels appropriate in that moment. That is an intuitive message you get that you might not find in any books, so it may seem unconventional, but it's actually the most appropriate meaning of that card for the reading that you're doing at that time. The best example I can give you of this is a personal one, and it was so significant for me that I will be coming back to this story multiple times throughout this channel. So one day, I was reading for a client who was asking about a boyfriend who stopped talking to her suddenly. She had lent him some money a few weeks prior to his disappearance, and she was asking about his motivations and whether or not he would pay her money back. In the process of doing my reading, two cards that landed side by side really stood out to me for some reason. It was the Three of Wands and the Death card. For whatever reason, when I saw that combination, the only word that stood out to me was travel. Normally, the Three of Wands represents enterprise or international commerce, and the Death card represents the ending of something, such as the end of a job, the end of a marriage, the end of suffering, etc. But in that moment, the imagery really resonated with me as representing someone who was going to travel soon, because in the Three of Wands, the person is looking out into the distance, and the rider in the Death card is literally traveling on a horse. I had a very neutral and literal feeling towards the Death card in that particular moment. So the main thing that stood out to me was the horse. I didn't see it as death or destruction or ending. It didn't feel like he died, and he didn't. It just looked like travel. So I asked her, is he about to travel somewhere? And she said, yes, he'll be taking a trip in 5 days. Now, at the time that I did this reading, I was actually kind of new to reading tarot for other people seriously. Prior to this, I did it in high school for friends or for myself or for family. But this was one of the first times I had a paying client who asked for a reading, so she was a stranger, and she didn't give me any clues about him except to say he stopped talking to her, and she wants to know if he'll repay his loan to her. So at that point, I knew I wasn't just cold reading or using context clues to get this message in the cards. It was a really distinct and clear feeling when I saw these two cards together and asked her to confirm my hunch, which she did. What I later found out was that the Three of Wands can actually also mean travel. And any figure on a horse in tarot can also suggest travel. But these were things I didn't know at all at that time because I was still kind of new. However, my intuition did know. I was actually quite shocked when this happened, and the experience really stuck with me because it was such a pure and obvious example of an intuitive interpretation of the cards that I had ever had. Up until that point, I always doubted whether I was reading the symbolism correctly, because I was always very nervous about getting it right. But when she confirmed that he was, in fact, going to travel soon, it was like the confirmation I needed to know that, yes, when you get those seemingly random intuitive hits, it's okay to trust them. Reading the cards kind of changed for me after that, and I learned to take my intuition much more seriously, and start to write these instances down to keep a record of new meanings that were significant to me specifically. If I were to open my journal and show my personal list of meanings to other experienced tarot readers, they may not necessarily agree with me, or they might say they'd never heard of the cards meaning that. But those meanings were accurate for me at that time and within the context of the question that was asked. So that's something to consider while looking at the card meanings. The fourth thing to consider while learning tarot card meanings is whether or not you want to incorporate the negative aspects of a card when doing readings. Each card has a light side and a shadow side, but they don't always correspond to good versus bad meanings, so I'm going to try to stay away from that kind of language. The light side of a card like the Fool might be, now is a good time to start a project or venture, but the shadow aspect might be, you're being reckless and foolish about a situation. You can get both of these meanings from the upright card just by itself, because it all depends on the context of the question, your intuition, and even the type of spread you're using if you are using a tarot spread. Another way to determine whether a card is light versus shadow is to assign all of the light meanings to the upright card and all of the shadow meanings to the reversed cards. The only issue with this is that some cards emphasize a shadowy or negative meaning in their upright position, while their reversal may be more positive. For example, the Nine of Swords. In its upright position, it may indicate problems or mental anguish that keeps you up at night. But when reversed, those things may be easing up, or we can say that now is the time to come out of your despair because it's no longer productive. The reality of it is that some tarot cards have meanings that are inherently kind of negative or disappointing, even scary, like loss, depression, anxiety, or deception. But even these cards have a light side. It's just a matter of how you want to look at the card and whether or not you want to incorporate those meanings into your readings. Some people want to stay completely positive during readings and will reframe a negative or scary meaning of a card into something more positive or constructive. In fact, there's a book called Fearless Tarot by Elliot Adam, and the tagline of the book is How to Give a Positive Reading in Any Situation. I'll leave a link to the book in the description below if you want to check it out. But this is one way to view the card meanings. Another way is to say, well, life can be very dark sometimes, and the tarot can reflect that for us, so why not read the negative messages or warnings? In this case, again, there are two major ways to do this. One is to read the cards only upright and use intuition and context to know when the card is saying something positive versus when it's revealing a shadow side. Or you can use reversals and say that a more positive card upside down is revealing its shadow side, while a more negative card is revealing its lighter side when it's reversed. There's a bit more nuance with reversed cards than just light and shadow, but we can get into that in more detail in other videos. But very briefly, a reverse card could be the shadow side, the light side, the opposite of the upright meaning, or it could be that the energy of the upright meaning is blocked when reversed, or that there's lowered potential for that card's upright meaning to shine through in a particular situation, or that the meaning is just less intense when reversed. In the end, the use of reversals and reading any negativity from the cards is a matter of preference, intuition, and context. Another way of determining whether you're looking at a direct meaning or a shadow aspect is to use spreads. The position of a card in a spread can help you determine what specific meaning a card is trying to convey. For example, in a love spread, you may have 3 positions, one after the other, that represent something relevant to the question at hand. Let's say I use a simple 3-card spread to ask if someone is interested in me romantically. I designate the first position to represent how that person views me, the second position to represent what they are feeling towards me, and the third position to represent the outcome or whether they will make a move, or if I should be more forward and make the first move myself. Depending on the cards that land in those positions, I should theoretically be able to determine if the message is a positive one or a negative one, or if the advice is more light versus shadow. Now, this is the part that's kind of intimidating for beginner readers, and I know that it was for me for a very long time. But the transition from knowing a single card's basic meaning to putting it all together and deciphering how these cards all work to give me the full picture is what takes practice to perfect. For example, if I ask, does Joe at work, who gives me a lot of flirty attention, want something more from me outside of work? And I pull the Nine of Swords reversed in the how does he feel about me part of the spread. What the hell does that mean? I stopped giving him anxiety? He doesn't cry at night anymore? What does it mean? It doesn't make any sense if you only look at single definitions like, well, this is a sad card, but upside down it's not sad. Okay, but that doesn't help me in a love spread. What does this card mean is a question whose answer will vary greatly based on a multitude of factors. Like, yes, the basic meaning, but also, where did it land in the spread? What other cards are next to it? What is the essence of your question? If you're just flirting with someone, you can't ask, well, when will we get married? The tarot will begin to become a bit finicky. Whatever is going on in your life to influence what you're asking will be picked up by the cards. For example, someone might ask a love question, but their finances are in such disorder that the tarot refuses to answer the love question and wants to confront the financial situation. You'll end up with a love reading that's full of pentacles and swords. So that also needs to be taken into account. This sort of situation, where the tarot is choosing to respond to a question that's more important, is part of the shadow aspect of reading tarot cards, in my opinion. But anyway, getting back to the main topic, which was determining light versus shadow meanings in the cards. The question is, how will you know when a card's meaning is light or shadow? Well, the answer will come with context and from your own intuition. Depending on the question, depending on the situation, and depending on how you feel during the reading, you will be able to tell whether you're looking at a positive meaning or a shadow aspect. You will just need to trust yourself on that, and that is difficult, I know. The only way to get better at doing that is to practice, practice, practice. And that's actually what this channel is for. I want to do a lot of practice readings with all of you so that we can get the hang of interpreting the various nuanced meanings of these cards in multiple types of situations. The fifth and final thing we should consider when learning tarot card meanings is how each card's meaning can change when they're sitting next to another card. Like in the personal example I gave earlier of the Three of Wands and the Death card, alone these two cards may mean one individual thing, but together they have a whole different dynamic. And we again open up new meanings based on how the images look when we put them together. What I hope with this channel is to eventually showcase individual cards and their meanings, as well as 2-card combinations, and then 3-card readings, all within the context of major topics like love versus career, etc. At least that's my intention. In general, when cards are put together, their individual meanings can change to represent the combination they're making, and that's not just the verbal meaning like commerce next to endings, which would, if read like that, mean someone's business might fail soon. But what if the person isn't talking about a business at all? What then? We don't just say, okay, this means commerce, and this means loss, so loss of a business, in all situations all the time. There's more subtlety in reading that we should learn, and we should learn it through practice. For instance, the person in one card may look like they're doing something that is a natural progression to the next card, so it looks like a visual story. Such as, for example, in the cards on the screen, this person looks like they're walking away, and they might be going into this position. They're going now on a little canoe. We can also consider if the cards are facing one another or facing away from each other. This is another way people interpret the cards. You see here, she is facing him, he is facing her, but the knight is facing away from both of them. Again, this is arguably the most difficult part of learning tarot, because it's easy to know the Fool means a new beginning, but it's a little bit more nuanced to know what the Fool paired with Judgment might mean when a client asks you, is my husband cheating on me? So with all that being said and taken into consideration, I think the best thing to do if you're just starting out trying to learn the card meanings would be to take some time out and look at each card, one by one at first, and 1, describe what you see and maybe how the image makes you feel and why you think you feel that way. 2, pick out the meanings from a trusted or favorite source like your favorite tarot book or favorite tarot teacher, and pick the meanings that really resonate with you. 3, consider some unconventional meanings. Sit with yourself after a meditation session or after a bath or shower and see what words come to you when you look at a card. If nothing comes, that's fine. Just be ready to jot things down when you're doing a reading for yourself or for someone else, because intuition might strike weeks, months, years later, and you'll see a card or a combination of cards in a completely new light. Try to also keep track of how often you see a card or cards representing certain concepts, like, for instance, You may do 10 readings, and maybe 7 out of 10 times you notice that the Empress represented a female CEO, or boss, or head of a large company. I don't think that is necessarily a traditional meaning, but let's say you have found that, for you, as a reader, when you see the Empress, more often than not, it was confirmed to you that she represents a female leader of some workplace or office or large corporation, and not just the head of a household like a mother or a grandmother, which is actually the traditional meaning of the Empress. Again, that was just an example. But do keep those patterns in mind, because if there's something you notice popping up often, then that meaning is unique to you, and it's important in helping you read the cards accurately. At that point, it doesn't matter if you've never seen it in a tarot book before. Spirit, your higher self, or your intuition is speaking directly to you, and you should make a note of it. The fourth thing was to remember that the cards have shadow aspects, and to decide whether or not you want to incorporate that in your readings. Remember that every card, even the supposedly good ones, like the Four of Wands, will have a shadow. Nonetheless, you may decide you don't want to be the type of reader to give anyone bad news, and that's fine. That's a style of reading. Finally, remember that context is everything when you're learning the meanings of the cards. The context of the question, the context of other cards next to one another, and if you use spreads, the context of the spread you're using. Don't be afraid to sit with a tarot card and ask yourself questions like, how would this card's meaning change if it were next to the Temperance card, or the Five of Pentacles? And see if you feel if there's a change in the card's basic meaning. Take the time to do these things now while you're still studying and practicing, because it will aid you immensely for the next time you're doing a reading for yourself or for someone else. Okay, that's it for now, and I hope this helped you on your tarot learning journey. If you'd like to see more videos about tarot, then please feel free to subscribe to the channel, as I aim to make more videos on topics related to cartomancy, witchcraft, and occultism in general. I also plan on doing some book reviews and recommendations on various topics related to esoterica and spirituality in the future, so be on the lookout for that as well if you're interested. If you want to help this channel grow, then please interact with this video by liking it or sharing it with other like-minded people. And please do leave me some comments to let me know if this was helpful at all, or if not. And if it wasn't, how can I make it more useful? What other topics would you like to see discussed here? And I absolutely encourage you to share your experiences or synchronicities while reading tarot. Have any of you ever had weird off-the-wall meanings pop out for you from the cards while doing a reading or a daily draw? If so, I really would love to know about it. Please leave a comment. Even though I've been reading for more than 20 years now, I still learn something new every day, and I always look forward to that. So please do share if you have something to say. Thank you very much for being here with me today, and I hope to see you all very soon in another video. Take care, and we'll talk soon.